Hello, community. It's already that time of the year again. It's back to school, back to work. Sometimes for people, this time of the year feels like a brand new year. And it's also a time that many of us struggle with the demands from our little ones, or sometimes our not so little ones, around the demands of school, around school fees, if your children are going back to university or college, around lunch money, around all of the gear that kids need for back to school. Sometimes it feels endless. So my question for this month's Timely Tips is, how do you talk to your children about the big word, M, money? And so we're going to spend, myself and my team, we're going to spend the next 15 minutes or so exploring strategies for how you can talk about money. So please stay tuned. Thank you. So Sharon, our office mom, is back this month, and we're talking about back to school and talking to your kids about money because, this is something that has come up many times for me with clients. They often ask me to be the person who might be passing on information to their kids, often about they can't afford things.
That's right.
And justifying
and they want things.
Exactly, with a financial plan, why they can't afford to say yes all the time to their kids. I think that this is a subject matter that more and more Canadians are struggling with, is how to have that money conversation with your kids, how to set boundaries, really how to teach them values around money, how to pass on financial wisdom to their kids, and really to empower them with the money habits they're really going to need to get through their lives, right? Because as parents, we're not always going to be here to protect them and help them. So how do we help to create, financially independent children? What are some of the things you've seen when you talk to clients coming into the practice? What's getting in the way when they're talking to you about having conversations with their children around money?
I think there's a lot of people who have different strategies and personal experience. Our kids have always had a bank account from middle school on, and all of a sudden, of course, they're very conscious of how much they spend. But as they get older...
Oh, really? I just wanted to touch on that. So you're saying they have their own bank account, and then they become conscious. Were they conscious before?
Not at all. Not at all. It's like want, and all of a sudden, okay, yeah, sure, you want it? There's your bank account.
So when
I don't want it anymore.
So when it's coming from mom's or dad's bank account, the sky's the limit. But when it's coming from their own bank account,
different game.
They might want to be a little more fiscally responsible.
Exactly.
Very good to know.
And then as they got older, 15 years old, they got themselves a part-time job, and we help them identify, a third of it's going to go to your savings account, a third of it's going to go to Mad Money, and maybe a third is going to go to another allocated fund or something towards school or something that's going to be important.
Or even something they might be saving for the short term. And so I think, for people out there who are struggling with, what can I do? Because I know that this time of the year I'm going to have that conversation. No, you can't get the latest iPhone, and maybe unless it's coming out of your bank account. Unless it's coming out of their bank account. So establishing money conversations earlier, because it sounds like you started it in middle school, is a great way to at least get the conversation started. And what I'm hearing as well is really helping them create a strong money habit with, this a third kind of scenario. So money away for the future,
That's right.
Our goal, money away for maybe short-term spending, and maybe money away for just mad things that they may want to do on the fly.
Yeah. And what they learn, our kids have learned from that, is they can live off a third of their pay. They can survive that. And so as they get older, it's not going to be such a huge transition.
It's no different, I think, than when we talk to clients about, the 10% rule, where save automatically 10% of your savings, so that it gets into a habit, so they're living on the other 90%, or even the 20% rule, they're living on the other 80%. Just getting them in the habit, I think, is a fabulous habit to form.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this tip, Sharon. We'll see you next month.
All right, thanks.
Have a good one. All right, so Nancy, I think this whole thing about forming really good habits for kids around money is a really good conversation that we're having this month, because people are struggling with having these conversations with their kids. We just talked to Sharon about why it's important to have this conversation earlier. So some of the things we were talking about is really, how do we pass on these values that we want to share with our kids? How do we help them form the right habits? And how do we give them wisdom? So I'd just love to know your thoughts, what you've heard from clients, in terms of what you think is getting in the way, and even just your own personal stories.
It's harder than you think having this conversation with your children. I've heard from many clients that they've tried to implement some kind of budget or savings plan with their children, and it just doesn't work with their young age. Myself personally, I spoke to Christian for years about doing that.
Christian's your son.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it just never worked. He didn't have a part-time job, so he got an allowance, but it was minimal. So it was very difficult for him to establish some kind of savings program. But I know that recently the landscape of the public school system has changed.
This is a really good thing.
Yeah, and in grade 10, the Ontario province implemented a finance course for all grade 10s. So when Christian finished that course, we were then able to have some follow-up conversations to what he learned, and he had a better understanding of the value of savings and compounding growth in his savings. And as much as being a financial advisor, and talk to him about savings and the value of being able to retire at 50, they just don't get it at that young age. So thankfully the school system is stepping up and helping these children get some amount of knowledge in order to help parents talk to their kids.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think there's a couple things that come up. One is definitely having other resources that can help bridge the gap, bridge the conversation is useful to parents trying to talk to their kids about money, just so that they can get a sense of what the landscape around finances look like. And as advisors, we do that too, right? I often find that I'm often brought in to do talks to kids around financial literacy in the school system. I'm often in conversations with their parents. We try to have a conversation as well. Sometimes they'll ask, I'm sure yourself, for tips around how they can bridge that conversation. Because it's different when it's your own kid. Nobody takes advice from their own family, but it's often easier and it's more palatable coming from a third party. So I find often as advisors, we play a really key role with our clients, Nancy, in just getting information out there, helping them steer these conversations, helping them figure out what some kinds of things that they can pass on in terms of habits, good habits they can form, like that third habit that Sharon was talking about. But just even explaining basic concepts to them so they can pass on that wisdom to their children.
It's important, the earlier the better, for sure, Jackie. I know that a lot of children struggle once they get to post-secondary education. So the earlier they learn those, 3 values, the less they'll struggle if kids do go on to post-secondary education.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the biggest things kids struggle with after high school is the budget at school. And a lot of kids fall into depression or leave school because they've never learned those 3 values.
Well, and that's it. So it's the earlier we can get them budgeting. So, you were mentioning that your son didn't have an allowance, but just even explaining the concept of budgeting earlier rather than later, and whatever money they're working with, even if it's $10 and they're putting $10 in an account and they know 10% has to go into the account just for saving, just to keep that concept, even if it's in a jar. If they have so it's not a bank account, but they have jars, they can know, $2 or $1 of that $10 is going into that jar for the future. It's just a great practice to have. They do say that millennials report the greatest source of anxiety around money, even though they're the wealthiest generation. They report the greatest source of anxiety around money and around budgeting. So thank you for talking about that and for sharing your story about your own journey with your son. Thanks again, and we'll see you next month.
Great.
So Nydia is back this month, our busy bee, and she is here talking about why it's important to have a conversation with your kids around money. And I especially was looking forward to talking to you, Nydia, just because you have children of varying ages. Lucky you, right?
Oh, yeah.
So there's lots of conversations to be had about money. And so I think your particular story is important because a lot of clients can relate to having conversations with kids at varying ages about money. And we know that, people find it very difficult to have these conversations around money. And so our video this month really focuses on, why it's important to pass on wisdom about money to kids, why it's important to really pass on those really good habits around money, and then also just, why it's important to pass on those strategies on how they can, really talk to their kids and pass on that legacy. Because, whether we do it or not, the truth is, whether we talk to them about money or not, they're still learning some lesson.
That's right.
So I just wanted to know what your experience was. You've also worked in the industry for a really long time, even before we were working together, talking to other clients. So I just wanted to know what your experience was and what's getting in the way.
Okay. So I found that when my kids were growing up, I tried to get them to do chores for money.
Right.
And a lot of times they just wouldn't do the chores. And so they didn't get paid the money because I never wanted to teach them that money comes for free.
Right.
And so then when they turned old enough, I actually told them that they should get jobs to buy the stuff that they need for their wants.
Right. So what I'm hearing from that is a really important value that you're sharing, and it's something that my mother shared with me as well, which was she often told me that she couldn't afford things that were really outside the realm of our needs, like the basics, food, clothing, shelter, and I mean basic stuff, not the designer labels from the 70s I remember really wanting that she said no to. But she often would say to me, I can't afford it. And she'd say, but if you wanted it, you could get a job and you could work for it. And this was when I was in my teens as well. And I think that's an important story to share, just simply because not often do we feel comfortable telling our kids about, our finances, sharing our finances with our kids. And truthfully, there's no other way for them to know that, I would often sometimes see young children saying to their parents, when I'm in a store, and they'd say something like, Mom, I want this. Why don't you go into your bank account and get it so that I can get what I want? And so sometimes they think that money is this endless well, and it isn't. So, that's one scenario. What other things have you seen dealing with, your own children and clients?
So the other thing that I've seen is sometimes when I tell them I can't afford something, but then I go out and buy something for myself, they say to me, Mom, how come you can't afford to buy me this, but you can buy yourself that? And at that point I said, well, it's because I work for my money, and so I feel like I should be able to spend it the way that I want to.
Well, it's interesting because you brought up something that I don't know if any of you out there have seen Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. Seinfeld runs this show called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, and one of his guests was Chris Rock, and Chris Rock was talking to Jerry Seinfeld, both people who make a lot of money. You could say they almost have an endless well. And their children, so Chris Rock was sharing a story of being in his car with his children, and they're driving and talking, and his child says to him, Daddy, are we rich? And he says to his child, no, I'm rich.
That's right.
And I thought that's a really important lesson, because end of the day, what your money is your money. And, they have to work and build and acquire their own assets. And truly, if we're going to teach our children how to become financially responsible or fiscally responsible, what better lesson than that? Than for them to learn that they will have to one day make their own money, and that your money is your money, but you also have responsibilities to your family, and you're making sure those needs are met. That's a really important value to share. The stats say, actually, that the first generation makes the money, and the second generation loses the money. And often the reason they lose the money is they don't learn those really important values that even millionaires like Seinfeld, Chris Rock, and people like Warren Buffett are passing on to their children. So if they're passing on that wisdom, why shouldn't we be? So thank you. That was a really great story to share, and I look forward to seeing you next month on next month's Timely Tips.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Some resources that we want to share with you to help, to really help encourage the money conversation with your children. There's 3. And we're going to share the link at the end of this video for these resources, and we're also going to share them on our page, on our Timely Tips page. So please stay tuned for that. So the first book is called Christy and the Clever Cash Cow. It's a great book for kids who are literally under 7 years old, and you're wanting to teach them that third principle. The second book is called The 4 Little Pigs, and The 4 Little Pigs is really, again, a resource book giving kids the habits that they want to learn around money, and it's really great for kids really all the way up until middle school. The third book I wanted to talk to you about is called Blue Chip Kids, and Blue Chip Kids is a great book for kids from past middle school and beyond. In fact, I share this book as well with adults who want to learn a little bit about money. Blue Chip Kids is a great resource for helping kids understand basic principles around money, but also understanding things like the stock market, investments, saving for retirement. Looking forward to passing those resources on to you. So thank you again. So let's face it, money conversations can be challenging, whether you're talking to your children, talking to your partner. Having conversations around money can be super challenging. And the truth is, the more often we can have these conversations, the better. The more we get into the habit of having these conversations, the better. And in this month's Timely Tips, because we were focusing on having conversations with your children about money, some themes came out that I thought were important to summarize this video in. One is the earlier you can start having a money conversation with your kids, the better. The importance really of making sure that they understand that they, passing on values around money. What are your values? Really think about what your values are around money. You've probably learned values around money from your own parents. What are the ones that you'd rather not pass on? And which ones did you want to pass on to your children to put them on the right financial footing? And then really thirdly, how much are you sharing about money? So you're creating boundaries for your children around money, saying no to them. How much are you telling them about your own money circumstances? Are you telling them no? Are you willing to be authentic and honest with what you can afford? Are these important conversations for you to have with your children? We believe that they are. The truth is, as I had said in a previous segment, this generation, the first generation makes the money, the second generation loses the money, and often it's because we're not willing to have the conversations that we need to have about money with our children, which is, how can we help them to become more fiscally responsible? How can we be honest with them about money? And how can we ultimately lead them to become financially responsible, financially independent adults? Remember, we're not always going to be around. We're not always going to be alive to be there to help our children. And so really, the peace of mind that having money conversations creates is knowing that we're raising our children to become financially responsible, financially fiscal adults. So that's my wish for you, is that you have the conversation. This is a great month to start because there's I'm sure, lots of requests coming in, and feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to reach out to our team. If there is anything that you liked in this video, please feel free to share. And if there's something you'd love to see in a future video, we'd love to know. Thank you again for listening. Have a great month.